Bod, back in Dubai. I've got to say, I don't think we've ever done this. In terms of names for autobiographies, names for books, I think In Bod We Trust has to be one of the finest. Did you have a hand in that?
No, that was a biography. It wasn't an autobiography. Someone else making a few shekels off the back of me. He couldn't have done particularly well. I had a quick read of it. It was brutal. That was pleasant, so it's difficult to know why they called me that. The rest of my body filled out a bit, made my head look less fat as I got older.
Ben, any nicknames for you throughout your playing career?
Nothing to do with the fact that... Is that what you're trying to talk?
I'm not going there. I'm not going there, Ben.
We've had this...
Talking of Fiji, had an opportunity to see the boys in action a little earlier on. How do you feel they're coming into the new season, new series?
I thought they played beautifully this morning. Only really got out of first gear, you know, that loping stride with delicious offloads. That only sometimes the problem with Fijian teams, if things are too easy too early, they underestimate the opposition. So I expect that things will get a lot tougher for them. And they're playing Australia later, who are one of the real, I think they're one of the movers and shakers this year. They're going to play very well.
Brian, I mean, we are no strangers to this part of the world. We come back year after year to celebrate this great festival of rugby. I know it's very easy for us to get involved in hyperbole and talk up the tournament, etc. But in terms of kicking off a new World Series, a new Sevens series, there aren't many better places, are there? No,
it's not. I absolutely love it here. I think it's partly because we haven't had any Sevens of this standard since back in London in May, was it? Late May. So there's the excitement about this new series coming. It's December and it's cold back home, so to be over here and get a bit of warmth into the bones. But I think what always makes this fixture, I think it's brilliant that they start with it, is that there's the men's and women's collectively, and obviously the veterans is going on in the background too. I think you just always get a better atmosphere here because there's the mix, because you get some fantastic male athletes out there, and we're going to see some brilliant semi-finals from the women as well. The calibre of these men and women is just exceptional. How they're able to play the quality of rugby that they do in this heat is a real standout performer.
Let's talk very quickly, if we can, about the rise of the women's game. We were talking to Brett Gosper last night. He was talking about the phenomenal growth in the women's game. It's borne out on the pitches here as well. Just an interesting little aside as well. Yesterday, we had the Irish developmental women's side playing against Fiji, Ireland coming out on top. Is that indicative of the way that things are moving, not just in Irish rugby, but women's rugby?
Well, certainly in Ireland, a lot of Irish funding now is going into the Sevens game as opposed to 15s. Unfortunately, you know, for the 15s, it's probably stepped back a couple of paces, much to the annoyance of those that are playing that style. But it's kind of conversely, the focus is very much on 15s and the men's, which seems strange because we're all under one banner in the IRFU. But I saw some of the Irish women earlier on. They look in incredible condition. Some of them did play in the World Cup in 15s for Ireland early on in the year. We didn't do as well as we would have hoped, but definitely there's a focus towards being able to push harder and hopefully at times get into quarterfinals, semi-finals at women's rate, because I think they've definitely got more of an opportunity of doing that than our men's team do right now.
In terms, Ben, of the situation at the moment for Sevens, a man who's been involved in Sevens, pushing Sevens, the mantra of Sevens worldwide, for England Sevens, for Fiji Sevens recently. Are we in a good place in terms of Sevens? Because we're going into, what, 12, 24 months that is going to be crucial for Sevens with a World Cup and Commonwealth Games on the horizon.
Sevens is in a great place at the moment. We do need to change a few things. You know, the World Series is awesome, and that's the centrepiece, really. But we've gone 6 months without any international Sevens, so we do need to plug that gap. And there's ideas coming up about franchises, that big movers and shakers like IMG, who, you know, own the IPL or started that and own UFC, those sort of things. But we've got some upsets happening. I mean, this weekend we'll see some teams upset each other. Last night, in the women's game, New Zealand smashed America, and then this morning, USA knock them out in the quarter-final. And that is the bizarre thing about Sevens. Argentina beat America men's side, who are much fancied this year and have got Perry Baker World Player of the Year. So I want to see more top-table teams. You know, that 15s is becoming a narrower base again, with only 3 or 4 sides that can win the World Cup. In 7s, you know, you've probably got genuinely 6, and I hope it's on the increase.
In terms of the athletes, I know you touched on it just a little earlier on, Brian, and maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight, because if you're on your mobile phones, if you're involved, if I could ask you please to at some point to have a look at HSBC_sport. Why? Because there's a brilliant video on there that Brian got involved in just before he came out to Dubai. It's you experiencing the death zone. Explain the death zone to us.
Yeah, basically it's England Sevens pre-season, their most difficult training session, and about 6 months ago, I'm thinking it must have happened somewhere around Hong Kong, where I agreed to doing this training session, thinking, late one night, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. I haven't done any training for 2.5 years, but you know what? I'm willing to pit myself against the fittest men in the world. So anyway, it was one of those things that, oh yeah, that date will never come, and then eventually they do arrive. And I thought, oh my God. So I did minimal training. I did a small bit in the gym, a bit of straight line running. And then I haven't been that nervous for so long going out. And they were all laughing at me in advance of the training session, knowing how brutally hard it is for them and the fitness levels that they had. So the idea behind it is that the death zone, it's the comparable to Everest, is where humans have difficulty in breathing, and then they obviously have to go and do more exertions to meet this, to reach the summit. So it's concocted over a sequence of, you warm up, and by the way, I was absolutely sucking diesel after the warm-up. So before we even got to the death zone, I was struggling. And then it's a 7-minute, 7 segments of 3.5 minutes of really high-intensity work. So you score, it's 7 aside, full pitch, you score, and then immediately another ball becomes alive 80 meters away. So to score a try as well, every one of the team members has to at least be in the 22. So when you see Dan Robson burning down the wing and you're back in your own 22 and you're watching him going, there he is. That's a try for us. I'll just stay put. And then you realize I've got to make my way to the 22. And don't be the one guy that costs your side a try by not being at the 22. So you have to bust a gut to get there. I just get into the 22. And then Simon Aylward, the coach, goes, okay, that ball 80 meters up the other end of the pitch is live. And I turn around and I'm the closest one to that ball. Shit. So you turn around and you run, and then you realize guys that are 2 stone heavier than you are, going considerably quicker than you're, passing you out. So it's just their ability to go and go again, and under insane fatigue, have really quality of pass and technique and think so clearly and still communicate. Because the last thing you want to do when you're gasping for breath is to talk, particularly defensively on the inside, is about letting the security of the player, inside or out, you're there. The uncertainty of not knowing if a teammate is with you is what catches loads of teams out. But if you're able to be in a position to communicate and talk the opposition into mistakes, I think that's the difference in many occasions between winning and losing games, because the margins out here are so minuscule.
Ben, just to get your thoughts, I mean, from a coaching perspective, we've seen a lot of 15s boys try and get to the 7s game, especially with the Olympics last year. We're seeing more crossover at the moment. Is it a different type of training between 15s and 7s?
It is. You talk about those sessions, it reminds me of some of the stuff I used to enjoy as a coach, because you can get it, it's a bit like being a chef. If you get the repeated sprints right with very little recovery time, you get into this little delicious area where you can guarantee someone's going to throw up. And as a coach, you sort of quite like that. Sends a strong message. And that's the difference in 7s to 15s, that there's a lot of repeat sprint. You don't get those recovery times that you can get in 15s. And so they've got to be able to do that. And the injury rates are much higher in 7s. Everyone thinks that, it's a little bit more non-contact than 15s. But when guys are running at 30+ kilometres an hour, at somebody else it's 30+ kilometres an hour, and they get their tackle or their collision wrong, it normally ends up in a fairly serious injury. And so these guys have to be very athletically developed to try to avoid that and get themselves right. You can get a 15s player fit. There's no issue around that. But when we were talking to players like Sonny Bill Williams, And Sonny, who's got himself fit to compete at, professional heavyweight boxing, he's played rugby league at the highest level and obviously a World Cup winner with New Zealand. He said it wasn't so much the training, it was the finish game recovery, having to warm up again and do that 6 times in 2 days. That's what he just couldn't get his body used to. And that's why so many test match stars that tried to get into the Olympic teams struggled to do that because they couldn't get that right. And that takes a bit of time. And so it is slightly different in that respect.
There's not a lot of hiding anymore in professional sport because coaches visually are able to see who's putting the effort in and not. But if they can't see that, they can see it all recorded in their GPS units. And in the 15-man game, if you have someone sin-binned, 14 others can pick up the slack. If you have someone sin-binned in the sevens game, for 6 people to pick up that 7th-person slack is so difficult. And you have, towards the end of my career, for the last 4 or 5 years, I used to always record some of the least amount of distances when I was out training and playing. Now, it wasn't that I wasn't making a huge effort. It was because I was running smart. I didn't need to do the extra exertions when I was able to read play and know the ball isn't coming out to my man. I'm not going to do a shuttle here to show that I'm in the defensive line. The problem out there is there's no shortcuts. You have to travel, you have to do the meterage, and you have to always plug in. There's no dead wood. You can't carry someone. If you switch off for a second there, it's going to be a try. And it's very evident that you're the one at fault. So it's a pretty brutal place to be out there in a sevens format in that sort of heat.
You should have had a chat with... In my early days in 2007 and 8, we were the first team to use GPS. And you should have had a chat with Dan Norton because his stats were amazing. And it wasn't till about a year later that I realised that he was driving around in the car park to get his stats up. It was fairly cunning. Did really well.
Listen, we're going to go to the crowd. I just want to say a big thanks to these boys, not just for coming out to Dubai, not for being our rugby fans, but also for being sponsored by Factor 50 this morning.
It's 110, actually.
They're taking one for the team, as we find little bits of shade over there. They are taking one for the team. Let's get over here. Yes, sir.
Morning, guys. I'd just like to ask Brian, who's the best Welsh player he's ever played with on a Lions tour?
Oh, good question. Good question. Do you know, we had a night out on Thursday night. There's a new concept that's been introduced, spearheaded by John Smith, the South African World Cup winning captain, and it's about rugby centurions. Everyone that's played 100 test matches for their country or their country and the British and Irish Lions. I think there's 54 of us in total. There were 30-odd centurions in London on Thursday night. A brilliant, brilliant event. Very rare that we get an opportunity to spend time socially after we finished our career in those sort of numbers. So it was such a great event. But I hadn't seen Martin Williams, a.k.a. the Nugget, another ginger. Not quite as ginger, but pretty ginger. But hadn't seen him for about 3.5, 4 years. And I had the best time with him. We had such a laugh. It was so good to catch up. I'd been on 3 Lions tours with him, and he is a top-class guy, but he was an exceptional player. He was able to think like most outside backs. He had the skill set of most outside backs, but he had that doggedness and that physicality as well to link the forwards along with some intricate back play. So I definitely would pick Martin Williams.
Ben, you okay with ginger or terracotta, do you prefer, or
Autumn sunset? And plus,
autumn sunset. Okay.
Gingers are only allowed to call gingers gingers. Like he's already gone across that very early in the weekend.
Let's get some more questions from the floor. If you've got a question for the boys, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you. Gentleman here in an England jersey. Right, sir.
Why do we seem to see most coaches being Kiwi or Australian and not English? That's a question for Ben.
Crikey. Well, obviously, I think New Zealand have been at. I'm lucky enough that I've travelled around a lot, and when I was in Fiji, I spent a lot of time in New Zealand, and their skill sets of their coaches are outstanding. There's no particular reason why not. In football, it's very obvious that there's not many English coaches overseas because none of them speak any other language other than English effectively, and that's why they don't get jobs overseas. Some of them actually struggle to speak English. But I think it's generally because there's a higher standard in New Zealand, and I'm being blatantly obvious about that. I think England have some excellent coaches, you know, and you look at what's happening in Exeter at the moment, and I would imagine that he must be earmarked as the next England coach. But there's a good quality of coaches in the Southern Hemisphere.
The Paddies are breaking the mould, though. We've got Ronan O'Gara going the opposite way, going to Canterbury, which is quite the coup for Canterbury, but quite the coup if you're Ronan O'Gara as well, because he's been coaching Dan Carter for the last number of seasons. He's done some work within the Irish setup. The scrum coach is Greg Feek, who's also from Canterbury. So he's obviously impressed those guys enough for them to go back, report to Canterbury and say, do you know what, this guy would be a real asset. Why don't you bring him and do things in reverse? And let's try and plug some of his intellectual knowledge, rugby knowledge, into our system, and we'll be the better for it. So I think it's an incredible move for him. I think he's going about his coaching philosophies the right way and trying to experience different cultures, different ways of playing the game. So it's good to see that the trend has booked slightly.
Yeah, and we need to do that. More English coaches need to go overseas, and British coaches need to go to other cultures and coach in different ways and get that IP back off all the other countries. We don't do it enough, and the New Zealanders and Australians do that a lot more. They'll come across and they'll learn from the UK players in clubs, and then they'll go back and provide that for their clubs in New Zealand, Australia.
Another question from the back. Gentleman here. Yes, sir, over to you.
Honestly, which is the best sevens on the circuit?
No, I think probably, well, from my point of view, it's top two are Dubai and Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is still...
Hong Kong can get you in trouble.
Yeah, you have to give it respect, don't you?
Yeah, social media can be very, very cruel in Hong Kong. So I love Dubai. I just think it's a nice balance. The thing about here is you can give it a good welly, and if you're not in great shape for getting into town, it takes 45 minutes. So you're going to sober up and getting back in there, which has to be a great thing, right?
It's interesting what you decide on your tournaments, on what standards that you select them on. That's an interesting one, Brian.
Got another question down here, yes, sir.
First of all, great to meet two legends of the sport. The question is, now after the autumn internationals have just finished, how do you see the Six Nations panning out with great results for the likes of Scotland and so?
Jeez, you sound like you had a big night last night. Six Nations! I thought it was dry.
I think it's really exciting because we've now got, Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales, I thought, show some real flashes as well. So it's going to be a cracking Six Nations. I'm working with the French side as well at the moment as a consultant, and they've got a fair...
It's going well for you, so doing Trojan work.
Yeah. I'll maybe pretend I didn't say that, actually. Let's move on. No, carry on, please.
No, I agree. I think, do you know what the most exciting performances, I think, are definitely Scotland's from November. It's a real shame that they couldn't get that first elusive victory against the All Blacks in November, but a brilliant showing against Australia. The game did change on the sending off, but they looked as though they were in top form. Gregor Townsend's clearly come in and done a brilliant job. He's already beaten Australia twice in his 6-month tenure, so it's pretty impressive by any standards. England have been pretty experimental over the November period. I think their defence looks solid, but I think they've a fair bit of work still to do on their attack shape. So I don't think they're far from the finished article, but they don't have to be. Eddie Jones, every conversation that he's having is about judge us on our World Cup rather than on Six Nations. But they'll want to get that right as well. And an Irish perspective, we're building nicely. I think there's a nice bit of new blood has been pushed into our system with a couple of positions that I think older players were in the winter of their career, and we've had some fresh blood come in. So match that with some world-class halfbacks, but we need them protected. Our second string at halfback in particular is just nothing like Conor Murray and Johnny Sexton. So wrap those boys up in cotton wool as much as we can.
Let's get some questions from the floor. Who's got a question for the boys? Got a question here from the gentleman. Yes, sir.
Regards the parity between North and South Hemispheres rugby, they say that we're catching them up. Do you honestly believe that? Is it down to the the players' mindset, or is it they actually have got better coaches than we have?
I think when we talk about North and Southern Hemisphere, I think we're really talking at the moment of New Zealand, because we definitely overtaken what's going on at international level currently with Australians and South Africans. You know, and both of those, I thought Australia, you know, were unlucky against England, but the English system's very good at age group, and the UK systems. I still think we're behind New Zealand on skill sets and standard of play, both at school, provincial and Super Rugby level, and we're not quite catching up with them yet. But overall, I think there's parity, and you've seen that in the November internationals. Games are going either way now and swinging both ways. And Scotland were incredibly unlucky against the All Blacks, and they've had some scares. And obviously, Ireland knocked them, beat them last summer, or last year. So yeah,
I truly believe that you can't fully tell where we're at until World Cup year, because the cycle of the season, because we don't have this global calendar yet. It's all those Southern Hemisphere teams, you know, running on fumes at the end of their season. They come into November, and other than the All Blacks, I think the other Southern Hemisphere teams did look tired, did look in need of a few weeks on the beach. And it's, you know, conversely, we always struggle a small bit on summer tours, save for, you know, the likes of England when they had a big win in Australia last year. But I think you get a better sense of where the standards are at World Cup time. 2 years ago, it was 4 Southern Hemisphere teams. In 2 years' time, I don't think we'll see 4 Southern Hemisphere teams. I think at least a couple of Northern Hemisphere teams will be in there, so which would suggest we're definitely closing that gap.
Got a question down here. Yes, sir.
I just wondered, as a coach or a player, how do you motivate yourself when you're losing at half-time? What do you say to yourselves or the team to pick up and play on for the second half?
Brian, you've been in that position a few times.
A lot of times. Most of my career. I made a career on that. That's literally what my captaincy has been. Do you know what? I think there's such... You have to be very careful about being too result-focused. Particularly when things aren't going well in a game. You've got to identify what that is. And rather than seeing, looking at the scoreboard... Look at the small moments. I thought we got a great bit of advice about a game being 81-minute moments rather than 180-minute moment. So at half-time, just going about trying to correct whatever the issues are. A great example of that is the Heineken Cup final in 2012. We were 16 points down to Northampton. Our scrum was going in reverse, and that was absolutely killing us, because what would happen, we were making lots of unforced error. You'd make an unforced error, they'd get a scrum, they'd destroy us in the scrum, they'd get a penalty and field position. Marler was kicking, goals over for fun and kicking the ball 60 metres down the pitch. And you can't play, just shows the importance of a scrum. So we went in at half-time. Our scrum coach grabbed the 3 front rowers, looked at footage that had been showing in the first half, said, this is what you need to do. They changed the scrum around. We got the ascendancy, and the knock-on effect was the difference in the game, where we were then able to play all of our brand. We stopped all the unforced errors, and then we went out and won by 10 points in that game. So it's the really small moments. Sometimes you just have to think about where is it we're going wrong, and how can we change that positively, rather than think, oh God, the scoreboard, they're getting away from us. I hate using the term thinking of the process, but that is what you need to do. You need to think about what specifically you can change, and how can that have a positive impact on our performance.
I think we can overplay the role of the coach sometimes, that they're the fountain of all knowledge, and they make all the difference. I remember in the Scotland leg of the series in my last year with Fiji, we were losing at half-time, and first time I sort of let loose on the players and started shouting at them a fair amount, and they turned it around and they won the second half at a canter. Everybody back in Fiji was saying, "What, isn't Ben Ryan an amazing coach?" And actually what had happened was the boys had pretty much talked during the pre-match. They hadn't come out to the warm-up because they were too busy talking with each other. So we ran straight on the pitch, and they were cold in the first half. They had warmed up then, and then they played well in the second half. And when we were in Dubai once, in my first year in Dubai, with Fiji, and we beat New Zealand by a record score, 44-0. They put 8 players on the field, and Gordon wouldn't shake my hand afterwards. And again, everyone talked about a massive turnaround in Fiji. It was the first time I'd given any of the boys a can of Red Bull before a game. They literally went through the roof. They could have run all day. I'm surprised they only scored 44 points, actually.
Right, time for one more. We've got another question over there, and then we need to get the boys out of the sun so they're going to have a lie down before our 3 o'clock here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just picking up on the earlier conversation around autumn internationals, Six Nations, looking forward to the World Cup. Just wonder from the perspective of your experience, who are the young backs in British and Irish rugby that are catching your eyes at the moment? Who can we look forward to for the World Cup, and even looking forward to the next Lions tour? Who are the young guns?
You know, there's obviously England under 20s have this plethora of players coming through in recent years. They've been in finals, if not winning them, consistently getting there, and we've seen some of those players come through. So I don't think you're going to see too many very new faces coming through. So the guys that, you know, are still quite young that are impressing. I think you saw the quality of Elliot Daly. I know he mightn't be perceived as a young player anymore, 24 years of age, but I think he's one that's going to shine for England. I do think for Ireland, this young kid on the wing, Jacob Stockdale, has a huge amount of ability. He's raw still, but has massive capabilities. And beyond that, I think the players, young Sam Simmons, I don't know how old he is, seems like a great player from Exeter, got his opportunity in the Samoan game and looked really good. So it's funny, it's a hard one for coaches because they're trying to blood a few new players, but you're trying to get continuity of the ones that are there. And over the course of the next 2 years, you can't throw in too many new surprises. You've got to try and get that cohesion of units working together, back rowers working together, second rows, likewise centres and back three. All those small mini units are vital to having cohesion as a team. So I don't know if you're going to see that many new faces coming through from here on in.
No, I think you're right. And Simmons played sevens, actually, for England. That was one of his breakthroughs. And I was lucky enough to coach a lot of the age group boys, so actually, he didn't have a brilliant November internationals, but Henry Slade is a very talented footballer, and I still don't think England have quite got their 10, 12, 13.
He's sort of flattered to deceive. I've been lauding him for years. I've loved him as a player. He is an exceptional talent.
You put too much pressure on him, is that what you're saying?
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. And I don't know if he knows what his best position is. Does he want to be a 13 himself?
Age group, he was an outstanding 10. You know, he played really well there, and you know, I don't know if Tuolangi will get himself fit and ready back in the mix again, and with JJ and some of the other guys that have been Bentio.
Manu's only 25. Like, it's actually scary, or maybe 26. So if he can get back and fit for England, I think Eddie Jones is waiting for a partnership of him and someone. And if it can be Farrell and Tuolangi, I think England can win the World Cup. But you need to get Manu out in the pitch. I played with him in the British and Irish Lions in 2013, and for me, actually, at the start of the tour, I thought I had to partner with him in the early games if I wanted to play in the Test match, because I thought Jamie Roberts and Jonathan Davis were going to be a partnership used together, so I had to team up with someone, and I thought Manu was the guy. We got to play together early on, we worked really well, and then the selfish so-and-so went and got injured, and then, you know, I was left all on my own. So the rest was history, but I think if Manu can get back and get fit, he is such a destructive player, and him at his best is almost unplayable.
Listen, the guys aren't going to stick around to do some signings down here now.
In the shade.
I've just found some shade here. Why are we out there? Why not? We're going to do here later on. We're back here at 3 o'clock. Boys are sticking around in the shade to sign some bits and pieces. They are our HSBC rugby ambassadors. To all the Facebook Live team for being with us, thanks very much indeed. Put your hands together for Ben Ryan and Brian O'Driscoll.
Somebody to love you, like some stones will hobble yabba dabba do. Kiss and caress you and hold you, and my word is bond. Yo, PA, she's got the vibe, hon.